Imagine waking up, checking your phone, and finding out your business lost $18 million overnight. Not because demand collapsed, not because a competitor undercut you, because a pump stopped working. That's fish farming. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how that happens, including the story of a Florida company that raised hundreds of millions of dollars, built the most ambitious salmon farm on Earth, and watched it nearly collapse because of one invisible mistake over and over again. We'll come back to them. Stay with me because it gets stranger than you'd think. Right now, let's start with the pitch you've probably heard. Buy some tanks, drop in some fish, wait, sell them. Protein's always in demand. Wild catch is declining, so you're basically farming money out of water. It is not that simple. Here's the weird part. A fish farm isn't really a farm. It's a life support system for millions of animals that are trying to die at every possible moment, and you're financially responsible for every single one of them. So why do fish farms actually fail? You'd assume it's disease, or bad weather, or a bad year for salmon prices. It's usually none of those. The real answer is that everything, the animals, the revenue, the entire business, depends on one thing staying perfectly stable: the water. And that turns out to be a lot harder and a lot more expensive than it sounds. Why is water so hard to control? Picture trying to keep the water inside a fish tank perfectly balanced. Now imagine that tank is the size of a football field, and it's worth $300 million. And there are 300,000 living things inside it that will start dying within hours if you get it wrong. Every degree of temperature swing, every dip in oxygen, every shift in water chemistry, it's all working against you all the time. Which brings us to the thing that actually keeps fish alive: oxygen. How expensive is preventing an oxygen failure? This is where the numbers start getting strange. If you're building the classic image of a fish farm, open net pens floating in a bay, you can get in the water for a few $1,000,000. That's the cheap door. But if you want the version that shows up in industry headlines, a land-based facility that recirculates its own water, letting you grow salmon in a warehouse in the middle of the desert if you wanted to, you're now looking at hundreds of millions of dollars before a single fish reaches market weight. Tanks, pumps, biofilters, oxygen generators, backup generators for the backup generators. Here's what investors missed for years. None of that hardware makes you money. It only prevents you from losing everything at once. Because if the power goes out for too long, every fish in that building suffocates at the same time. You're not buying a pond. You're buying a machine that keeps thousands of animals breathing. And if the machine stops, so do they. Why are investors still funding this? Good question. Let's look at who actually owns these things. Company A owns 50 farms across 3 countries. A disease outbreak hits one of them, barely a dent in quarterly earnings. That's most of the salmon on your plate right now. Massive, vertically integrated, usually Norwegian or Chilean companies that own the hatcheries, the pens, the feed mills, and the processing plants all at once. Spread the risk far enough, and one bad site can't sink you. Company B owns 1 farm. The same outbreak hits, Company B is gone. That's the other version of this industry. A single operator, often backed by investors chasing the sustainable protein of the future story, betting everything on one location, one technology, one shot. Guess which version we're coming back to. The 3 things nobody puts in the brochure. Say you buy an existing farm. You inherit 3 things nobody mentions in the pitch deck. First, the biomass itself. Fish already in the water, at whatever health and growth stage they happen to be in, and you now own every one of them, thriving or not. Second, deferred maintenance. Biofilters, liners, pumps, they degrade in constant contact with water and waste, and the problems hide underwater, literally, until they don't. Third, the permits. Water rights, discharge permits, disease zone classifications. These can be worth more than the physical building, or they can come loaded with restrictions you don't discover until you try to expand. Here's the thing about all 3 of these costs. You don't see them on day 1. You see them the day a pump fails at 3 a.m. and you have 4 hours before your oxygen levels hit 0. How does a fish farm actually make money? Here's the weird part nobody expects. The fish isn't actually the product. Let me explain. There are 4 layers of revenue here, and they stack. The first layer is live weight, kilograms of fish times price per kilo. This is the number everyone quotes. It's also the least profitable form your product will ever be in. The second layer is processing. Gutted, filleted, portioned. Every step you do in-house instead of selling whole adds margin. A whole fish might sell for one price. The same fish filleted and packaged can be worth 2 to 3 times as much. The third layer is the one almost nobody outside the industry knows exists: byproducts, heads, frames, skin, offal, sold into pet food, fertilizer, and pharmaceutical omega-3 markets. On a well-run farm, this isn't waste management. It's a second business, riding for free on top of the first one. Nobody in the industry advertises this part, but on some operations, byproducts alone can turn a break-even harvest into a profitable one. The fourth layer is premium and direct channels: roe, smoked product, farm-to-table branding, small volume, disproportionate margin. Read that again. The fish itself is the least valuable version of your product. Everything you do to it afterward is where the real money lives. But here's where it gets less fun. Feed is the single largest recurring cost in this industry, often more than half of total operating expenses, and feed prices move with global fish meal and soy markets, completely outside your control. You'd think feed is what bankrupts most farms. It isn't. Equipment failure is. Because here's the trap almost nobody sees coming. When disease or a system failure wipes out part of your biomass, your feed bill shrinks, sure, but your power bill doesn't, your labor doesn't, your loan payments don't. Your fixed infrastructure costs stay exactly the same, now spread across fewer fish. The survivors have to carry the weight of the ones that didn't make it. The illusion that fools almost everyone. Here's the myth this video is really about. A full tank is not the same thing as a healthy business. Watch a live stream of a salmon farm and you'll see water full of fish, and you'll assume the business is fine. But density isn't the same as growth rate, and growth rate isn't the same as margin. A tank can be stocked to capacity with fish that are stressed, growing slowly, sitting right at the edge of a disease threshold, and it will look, on camera, exactly like a thriving one. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. A completely full facility, 100% stocked, can be losing money every single day, and nothing on the surface will tell you that. Occupancy is not income. In this industry, biomass is not profit. So what actually makes a farm successful? The engineers who built the modern version of this industry, people who spent careers optimizing water flow, not architecture, figured out something counterintuitive early on. Fish don't grow faster because you give them more space. They grow faster because you give them consistency. The best designed facilities aren't the biggest tanks. They're the ones with the fewest variables. Control the water, and you control the business. Fail to control it, and no amount of fish saves you. Now, here's where the story changes. Everything you've just learned, the cost, the fragility, the fact that one system failure can undo years of growth, all of it happened in real life to one company. And it happened at a scale that stunned the entire industry. The Blue House. In the mid-2010s, a company called Atlantic Sapphire looked at the entire aquaculture industry and decided the ocean was the problem. Every net pen came with sea lice. Every ocean farm came with pollution complaints, escaped fish, and a boat ride between the product and the customer. So the founders proposed something that had never really been done at this scale: grow full-cycle Atlantic salmon, egg to harvest, entirely on land, hundreds of miles from any ocean, in the recirculating tanks of a warehouse in Homestead, Florida. The pitch was enormous, and it was seductive. No sea lice, no net pen pollution, no disease drifting in from wild fish. Total control over every variable that had haunted the industry for decades. And because the facility sat less than an hour from Miami, the salmon could reach American dinner plates within a day of harvest, instead of a week on ice from Norway. Investors didn't just like the story, they fell in love with it. Hundreds of millions of dollars poured in. The company went public. Analysts called it the future of protein. The facility got a nickname that sounded almost affectionate: the Blue House. Construction crews built tank after tank, biofilter after biofilter, a small city of pumps and pipes rising out of the Florida flatland. For a while, it worked exactly the way the slide deck said it would. Fish grew, harvests happened, the story held. Then the system started talking back. The first die-offs were treated as growing pains, the kind of thing you'd expect from a technology nobody had run at this scale before. A batch here, a batch there. Engineers traced it to water quality, oxygen dipping, ammonia creeping up, a biofilter not quite keeping pace with the facility that kept getting bigger. Then one day it stopped being a growing pain. A system failure rippled through part of the facility. Hundreds of tons of salmon, animals that had been healthy, swimming, weeks from harvest, began dying within hours. Not slowing down, not getting sick and recovering, dying, all at once, in numbers that took a full year or more of growth and erased it in a single afternoon. And it happened again, more than once. Each time the company issued a statement, adjusted its projections, and explained what the engineers had learned.
Each time the market reacted like it was watching a company relearn the same lesson from scratch.
Here's what made it so brutal, and it's the same trap you just learned about a few minutes ago. The fixed costs never blinked. The chillers kept running, the pumps kept running, the oxygen systems, the staff, the loan payments, all of it kept costing exactly the same amount of money, now stretched across a population that had just been cut down overnight. The company scaled back its growth targets, cut staff, delayed expansion phases that had once been marketed as inevitable. Engineers who had spent careers on recirculating systems found themselves fighting a problem that doesn't show up in an engineering textbook. At a large enough scale, in a large enough facility, small imperfections in water chemistry stop being minor and start being catastrophic, because there's no ocean underneath the mistake to dilute it. In the sea, a bad day gets diluted by an entire coastline of water. On land, in a closed tank, a bad day has nowhere to go. Investors who had bought into the future of protein spent years instead watching a company try to prove the technology could simply survive itself. It's a story worth telling on a finance channel rather than a fish channel, because the lesson was never really about salmon. It was about what happens when an entire business, hundreds of millions of dollars, a public listing, a bold new vision for feeding the world, is downstream of a handful of pumps.
Zoom out. Here's the bigger force reshaping this whole industry. Wild catch fisheries have been flat or declining for decades, while global seafood demand keeps climbing. Aquaculture isn't a niche anymore. It now supplies more than half of all the fish humans eat on Earth. That growth has split the industry into two very different bets. Ocean pen operations, cheaper to build, but exposed to weather, sea lice, and escapes, and land-based tech-heavy operations, enormously expensive, but promising control and disease isolation. Neither one is the obvious winner. They're just different trades on the same underlying problem. Fish are fragile, water is unforgiving, and every efficiency gain creates a brand new way to fail, which explains why the survivors all look the same. The operations thriving right now are the ones that stopped treating fish as a single commodity. Multiple species, so one disease can't take out the whole business, byproducts sold as a real second revenue line, not an afterthought, direct-to-consumer branding to escape commodity pricing, and increasingly selling the technology itself, turning hard-won engineering lessons into a second product. The farms treating the whole system, fish, water, byproducts, brand, as the business, are the ones still standing in 10 years.
So does this business actually work? Here's the optimistic scenario. Stable water, strong feed conversion, disease kept out, byproducts sold at full value, a facility that runs for years without a major incident. Margins compound, debt gets paid down. The pitch turns out to be true. Here's the realistic bad year. One system failure wipes out a generation of fish. Fixed costs keep running against a smaller surviving population. Investors get nervous. The company spends years just trying to prove the model works instead of profiting from it. Both of these are real, not hypotheticals. The good version exists in Norwegian pen operators posting steady profits for decades. The bad version exists in a warehouse outside Miami that had to relearn, event by event, exactly how little margin for error a closed system actually has. Here's what nobody realizes until it's too late. Most people think a fish farm produces salmon. It doesn't. It produces stable water. The salmon are simply the evidence that everything went right.